steam is pouring out from under your hood on the highway, and the shop's estimate for a new radiator just landed at $1,826. According to AAA, cooling system failures cause 11% of every roadside breakdown in America. And here's what almost no service writer says out loud. In a huge share of those calls, the radiator itself was never actually broken. A stuck thermostat, a collapsed hose, a bottle of coolant sealant that costs less than a movie ticket. Any one of those creates the exact same red zone gauge that gets diagnosed on Ford, Toyota, Chevy, and Honda engines alike as a full radiator replacement. But here's what they're counting on. You can't tell a $15 fix from a $1,826 replacement just by watching your temperature gauge climb. Only a real diagnostic can, and most shops skip straight past it. So here's the binary promise. I'm going to show you the exact fix that saved real owners thousands of dollars, and I'm also going to show you the one warning sign that means you genuinely do need that new radiator, because missing that sign can cook your engine in under 10 minutes. Stick around, because by the time this video ends, you'll know exactly which one you're looking at. Why this data holds up. Before we go further, you need to know where these numbers actually came from, because this isn't a script built on YouTube comments and guesswork. Not every dollar figure in this video is pulled from published pricing data. Consumer Affairs surveyed 5 working mechanics directly for radiator, hose, and repair pricing. RepairPal's own fair price estimator, built from real shop invoices across the country, backs up the labor and parts breakdown. Kelley Blue Book and AutoZone publish their own separate cost guides for thermostats, water pumps, and coolant flushes. And every real owner story you're about to hear is pulled from verified customer reviews on Walmart, AutoZone, and Trustpilot, plus enthusiast forum threads with vehicle-specific detail, not invented for this video. But here's what makes this important. A lot of automotive content out there recycles fake statistics attributed to organizations that don't publish the studies being cited. We stripped every unverifiable number out of the script before recording it. What's left is smaller, but every figure here can be checked. What's actually happening under your hood? Your cooling system runs on 3 parts working together: the thermostat, the water pump, and the radiator. Understanding what each one actually does is the difference between a shop being able to sell you anything and you knowing exactly what's wrong before you even pull into the bay. The thermostat is a small valve that stays closed when your engine is cold, so it can warm up quickly, then opens once the engine hits its target operating temperature, typically somewhere in the 195 to 220 degree Fahrenheit range, to let coolant start flowing to the radiator. When a thermostat fails stuck closed, coolant never reaches the radiator at all, and your engine temperature climbs fast, often within minutes. The water pump is what actually moves coolant through the entire system. It's belt-driven on most gas vehicles, and it typically starts wearing out somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 miles. When the pump's bearing or seal fails, coolant either stops circulating properly or starts leaking out entirely, and either failure mode produces the exact same symptom on your dashboard: a rising temperature gauge. The radiator itself is the part that actually dumps heat into the outside air. Modern radiators are built with aluminum cores and plastic end tanks, a design that's far cheaper and lighter to manufacture than the old all-metal radiators from decades ago. Plastic handles thousands of heat cycling expansions and contractions differently than metal does, and over years of that stress, hairline cracks tend to form right at the seams where the plastic tank meets the aluminum core. That's precisely the kind of small, slow leak that develops gradually. The exact failure mode a repair shop can present to you as your radiator is failing, while showing you nothing more than a wet spot. Here's what makes this genuinely useful instead of just trivia: 3 completely different failures. A stuck thermostat, a worn water pump, and a cracked radiator seam all produce the identical symptom from the driver's seat: a rising gauge. Maybe steam, maybe a sweet smell from the coolant vaporizing somewhere it shouldn't be. From where you're sitting, you cannot tell these apart. That's exactly the gap a shop can exploit, because only one of those 3 failures actually requires the $1,800 part. AAA's own guidance lists the signs every driver should know: the temperature gauge climbing out of its normal range, visible steam or smoke from under the hood, a sweet or syrupy smell from vaporizing coolant, and coolant pooling underneath your parked vehicle. Each of those points toward a different likely cause, but none of them, on their own, tells you which specific part actually failed. That requires an actual diagnostic, which is the exact step that gets skipped most often. Here's a detail almost nobody explains at the counter: the location and pattern of a leak often tells you more than the leak itself. A slow drip that only shows up after the car has been running for a while and sitting overnight often points to a small crack that's only weeping fluid once the system pressurizes and the plastic tank expands from heat. Classic radiator seam behavior. A puddle that appears almost immediately after starting the engine, before it's even warmed up, points more toward a hose connection or a water pump seal that's failing under low pressure. and a leak that seems to track with your heater, worse when the cabin heat is running, notably better when it's off, usually means the heater core itself, tucked deep inside the dashboard, which is a different and considerably more expensive repair than anything else in this video. The math behind why the expensive option gets recommended. Let's follow the actual dollar figures because they explain almost everything about why this keeps happening. A full radiator replacement, according to Consumer Affairs survey of 5 mechanics nationwide, runs between $765 and $1,826 for parts and light labor combined on their sample vehicles. RepairPal's own fair price estimator lands in a similar range. Labor between $363 and $532, and parts between $990 and $996, putting the full job around $1,350 to $1,530 on a typical sedan. AutoZone's independent pricing guide quotes most radiator jobs between $400 and $900, with premium and luxury vehicles running well past $1,000. Now compare that to the other possible causes of the exact same symptom. A stuck thermostat. Kelley Blue Book puts full replacement, parts, and labor at $661 to $747. And AutoZone notes the part itself typically costs between $10 and $175, meaning most of that bill is labor on a job that usually takes about an hour. A failing water pump. Kelley Blue Book quotes $400 to $800 installed. A simple hose repair, which produces identical overheating symptoms to a cracked radiator, steam under the hood, a climbing gauge, typically costs $250 to $750, according to the same 5 mechanic Consumer Affairs survey. But here's what makes this suspicious. You've got 4 possible diagnoses for the exact same dashboard warning, separated by well over $1,000 between the cheapest and the most expensive. A thermostat job takes roughly an hour of labor. A full radiator replacement takes 2 to 4 hours of labor before parts are even added, at rates now running $75 to $130 an hour in most regions. Do the math on which repair generates more revenue for the shop, and you'll understand exactly why the expensive diagnosis tends to get reached for first when nobody's required to actually prove which part failed. None of this means every mechanic is dishonest. Most aren't, but the incentive structure consistently rewards the bigger invoice over the smaller one, and unless you specifically know to ask for a pressure test before authorizing any parts, you may never be offered the cheaper path at all. RepairPal's own guidance on radiator diagnostics backs this up directly. A proper diagnosis should always include a pressure test to check for leaks, because a stuck thermostat, a leaking head gasket, or even a failed radiator cap can all cause the exact same overheating symptom a full radiator replacement gets blamed for. If a shop skips straight to a radiator quote without performing that test, that's worth a second question. Location changes this math even further. High-cost states, California, New York, and the Northeast Corridor generally, routinely run labor rates well above the national average, which means the same radiator job that costs $900 in the Midwest can push past $1,800 on the coast for the identical part and the identical hours. That gap alone can exceed what most families budget for an entire year of car maintenance. The wider that gap gets, the more it matters that you rule out the cheap fix first, because the downside of skipping straight to a replacement scales right along with your local labor rate. What this fix actually is. So what is the fix that keeps saving owners thousands of dollars, and does it actually hold up under real driving conditions? It's not an internet myth. It's a category of product called Radiator Stop Leak, sold under names like Bars Leaks, K-Seal, and AlumaSeal, and it's been sitting on auto parts store shelves for well over half a century. The pelletized versions work almost like a controlled clot inside your cooling system. You pour the pellets into a hot, running system, and as coolant flows under pressure past a pinhole leak or a porous casting seam, the pellets soften from the heat, get pulled directly into the gap by the escaping pressure, and harden once exposed to air right at the leak site, physically plugging the hole from the inside out. This isn't some sketchy home remedy invented for a YouTube video. Longtime users on automotive forums describe decades of accumulated use sealing radiators, porous engine block castings, and even minor weeps at the block. Multiple forum contributors independently describe the same detail. GM and other manufacturers used to pre-fill brand new vehicles straight from the factory with sealant pellets, specifically to catch small, early life manufacturing leaks before they ever became a warranty claim. That's a product some manufacturers were quietly relying on before the car ever left the factory floor. But here's what makes this a lot more grounded than a miracle cure. This only works on a specific category of failure: small pinholes, porous castings, and hairline seam cracks. It does not fix a thermostat, it does not fix a worn water pump bearing, and it absolutely does not fix a blown head gasket, even though the symptoms can look similar from the driver's seat. Knowing the difference is exactly what the rest of this video is for. Real owners, real outcomes. Real numbers land harder than any statistic. So here are documented cases pulled directly from customer reviews and forum threads, not invented for this video. A Home Depot reviewer described an older pickup truck that had been sounding thin and winding out, with visible leaks the owner had been warned about. After treatment with a cooling system additive, the leaks stopped and stayed stopped. On AutoZone's own review page for their liquid aluminum stop leak product, one reviewer describes using it on a 350,000-mile Prius to seal a leaking head gasket weep, an outcome AutoZone's own review summary notes is common. Customers overwhelmingly report the product effectively sealing radiator and heater core leaks, with most seeing immediate results that prevented a costly repair. Another reviewer describing a Chevy Cobalt that was leaking antifreeze so badly the radiator ran dry within 2 to 4 days of normal driving. Even while the car sat parked, tried other liquid stop leak products first, with no success. Switching to a pelletized formula and using only half the recommended bottle, followed by a 30-minute drive to let the pellets set, stopped the leak entirely. More than a month later, it hadn't returned. On a tractor and equipment forum, one longtime user described a 1977 Nova with a similar pinhole leak. The stop leak treatment held for 1.5 to 2 years before an unrelated water pump failure eventually triggered a full cooling system replacement anyway, meaning the cheap fix genuinely bought years of extra life on the original problem, not just days. One more from a Trustpilot review of a copper-based liquid stop leak product. The owner described a freeze plug leak behind the engine's motor mount that was losing coolant fast enough to be genuinely alarming, described in the review as pouring out a gallon in less than a minute. After trying a competing product with no success, the owner applied the copper-based formula directly in a parts store parking lot. According to the review, the leak stopped within about a minute, avoiding what would otherwise have required pulling the engine to access the freeze plug directly. A labor-intensive repair that would have dwarfed the cost of the bottle many times over. But here's what makes this a lot more complicated than a clean win, and any honest video on this topic has to say it out loud. Stop leak products absolutely do fail, and they fail in specific, well-documented ways. A Walmart reviewer described 3 separate mechanics recommending bars leaks for a failing heater core on a 1996 Lincoln. Instead of solving the problem, the sealant complicated it further, and the radiator itself blew a seal within a week of minimal driving afterward, turning one repair into 2. Users on automotive forums describe similar outcomes with aluminum powder formulations clogging heater cores and radiator passages when used on the wrong type of leak. That pattern is remarkably consistent once you line the cases up side by side. Stop leak works well, often very well, on small pinholes and porous castings. It works badly, or actively creates a new problem, on heater cores, hybrid battery cooling loops, and any leak large enough that the pellets simply drain out before they get the chance to harden. The honest warning, when not to use this. Here's the part that separates this video from a sponsored ad for a sealant company, and it comes straight from the same source that publishes the Radiator. Cost data we've been using all video. RepairPal's own radiator guidance includes a direct warning about stop leak products. While they may appear to save money in the short term, their ability to stop leaks can also eventually clog and restrict circulation elsewhere in the cooling system, potentially affecting the radiator, the heater core, and the coolant passages inside the engine itself. That clogging, if it happens, causes the exact overheating it was meant to prevent, and it can be extremely costly and difficult to flush back out. There's a specific documented failure case worth knowing here. Owners on hybrid and electric vehicle forums have flagged official manufacturer warnings against using any stop leak sealant in vehicles equipped with a passenger compartment heater loop, a battery cooling system, or hybrid electronics cooling, because the sealant can clog narrow passages that were never engineered to be self-sealed, and those passages are extremely expensive to clear. If you drive a hybrid or an EV with battery thermal management, this fix is not for you. Full stop. So here's the actual decision tree, and it takes about 5 minutes to work through before you spend $1 on anything. If you have a small, slow leak, a wet spot that grows gradually, coolant that needs topping off every week or 2 rather than every day, no visible crack you can point to, you're likely looking at exactly the kind of pinhole or porous seam this fix is built for. If your engine is losing a full radiator's worth of coolant in a day or 2, if you can see a visible crack or split hose, or if you're driving a hybrid or EV, skip the sealant entirely and go straight to a proper mechanical repair. The wrong fix in those specific cases gets expensive fast and can turn a $200 problem into an $800 one. And here's the single most important sign in this entire video. If your engine keeps overheating no matter how much coolant you add, especially if you're also seeing white smoke from the exhaust or a sweet smell mixing with exhaust fumes, that's one of the strongest indicators of a blown head gasket letting combustion pressure into the cooling system. Sealant alone almost never resolves that. Continuing to drive on that symptom risks warping your cylinder head or seizing a piston against the cylinder wall. And at that point, you're not looking at a $1,800 radiator anymore. You're looking at a full engine rebuild. Subscribe, CTA. This channel exists to find exactly this kind of gap between what a symptom looks like and what a shop charges for it. So if that's useful to you, subscribe now, because next week breaks down the 5 warning signs that separate a cheap thermostat fix from a genuine head gasket failure. And getting that call wrong is the single most expensive mistake covered in this entire video. Sectio why this keeps happening across the industry. Zoom out for a second, because there's a bigger reason this pattern repeats across the entire industry, not just to a handful of unlucky drivers. Radiator construction shifted toward aluminum cores and plastic end tanks decades ago, specifically because that design is cheaper and lighter to manufacture at scale than the older all-metal radiators. Plastic handles years of heat cycling differently than metal, and that difference produces a predictable, gradual failure pattern. Hairline cracks at the seams, not sudden catastrophic breaks. That's exactly the kind of failure that a small, cheap fix can catch early, and exactly the kind of failure that's easy to present to a customer as your radiator needs replacing, without ever running the test that would show whether a cheaper repair could handle it instead. None of this is a hidden industrial secret. It's public engineering knowledge anyone can look up, but almost nobody explains it to the person standing at the service counter, wondering out loud why their 8-year-old sedan suddenly needs an $800 to $1,800 part it never needed before. Your action plan. Here's exactly what to do the next time your temperature gauge creeps toward the red zone. Step 1. Check your coolant level and look for the source of the leak yourself, if it's safe to do so once the engine has fully cooled. A wet spot, a visible drip location, or a puddle color can tell you a lot before you ever call a shop. Step 2. If the leak looks small and slow, not a hybrid vehicle, not gushing, no visible crack, a bottle of pelletized stop leak costs a small fraction of a shop visit and has a documented track record on exactly this kind of failure. Follow the instructions exactly, including driving time to let the pellets set. Step 3. If a shop quotes you a full radiator replacement, ask directly whether they performed a pressure test to confirm the radiator itself is actually the source of the leak, rather than a hose, a thermostat, or a water pump. A shop confident in its diagnosis will have no problem showing you exactly where the system is losing pressure. Step 4. If you're seeing repeated overheating that returns no matter how much coolant you add, especially alongside white exhaust smoke or a sweet smell from the tailpipe, stop driving the vehicle and get it to a shop immediately. That's the one scenario in this entire video where the cheap fix will not save you, and continuing to drive on it can turn a moderate repair into a total engine loss. That sequence, check, then decide, is the difference between a $5 bottle and a 5-figure mistake. One more piece worth adding to the plan. If you're buying a used vehicle with no service history, treat the cooling system as a non-negotiable part of your pre-purchase inspection. A slow coolant leak is easy for a seller to mask with a top off the morning of a test drive, and it's exactly the kind of hidden cost that turns a good deal into a bad one within the first month of ownership. Ask to see the coolant reservoir cold, check the color and clarity, and if you have any doubt, a $15 pressure test at an independent shop before you buy is the cheapest insurance you'll find on the entire transaction. The real numbers, side by side. Let's put every figure from this video in one place. A bottle of pelletized radiator stop leak, a small fraction of a full replacement. A thermostat replacement, $661 to $747 installed, or under $200 if you handle it yourself. A water pump, $400 to $800. A coolant flush, done as routine maintenance before any of this becomes an emergency, $131 to $209, according to Kelley Blue Book's own published pricing. A full radiator replacement, when it's genuinely needed, $765 to $1,826, sometimes climbing past that on luxury or European vehicles. Run the comparison, and the gap between the cheapest possible fix and the most expensive quote is not a rounding error. It's the difference between an inconvenient Tuesday afternoon and a bill you're still paying off next year. And the earlier you catch the problem, the more that gap works in your favor. A $150 coolant flush done on schedule is cheap insurance against ever facing the $1,800 decision in the first place. Waiting until the gauge is already in the red is exactly the position that makes the expensive quote feel unavoidable, because by then you're not shopping for a fix anymore, you're just trying to get the car off the side of the road. Here's the bottom line. An expensive part isn't always the actual problem. Sometimes it's a $5 bottle of sealant your shop never mentioned, because a pressure test that costs them nothing to run also costs them a $2,000 invoice. Check the leak before you sign for the radiator. It's the cheapest diagnostic you'll ever run on your own car. If this video just saved you the cost of a radiator, tell me in the comments what your shop quoted you. I read every one. Our next video breaks down the 5 warning signs that separate a cheap thermostat fix from a head gasket failure that can total your engine in a single drive. Subscribe so you don't miss it.